Oh, stop it. Look at you guys. It's almost worth having gone all the way there just to sort of come back and have the embrace of St. Mary's. So we moved a couple of years ago to Shropshire, which I still can't actually say because it's a weird Shropshire. It's a bit embarrassing. Which is the least populated county in Britain. So there's not very many people there. If you ever want to get away from it all, you're very welcome to come and stay with us. In fact, I am obviously, it's wonderful to be here because I love this church, and it's wonderful to be here on this morning of the dedication of Indy. But I'm also secretly very grateful because if I wasn't here now, I would be in pandemonium, which isn't a kind of metaphor for the existential place in my mind that's quite dark. It's a panda-themed soft play in... No one tell Una that's where she could be right now. It's in an industrial warehouse, of course it is, just on the outskirts of Telford, with really bad coffee and a lot of noise on a Sunday morning. So thank you so much, Sally, for this opportunity to be here. Oh, golly. I'm just going to start with a story. A few years ago, when I just had got two kids who are now 7 and 4, but I just had the 4-year-old. She was about, probably about, no, I think even younger, like maybe 5 weeks or something. And I decided I was ready to take them both out by myself, on one of those, not just to the park, but on, when you leave the house in the morning and then you're out all day and you don't get back till sort of 5 o'clock. So I decided I'm going to take them both. We're going to go on public transport. It's going to be fine. I decided we go to Mudshoot City Farm. Don't know why. I do know why, actually, because of the DLR, isn't it? Because if you're taking kids out, then they can sit at the front. Bruno's about 3, pretend to be the driver, nodding, if you've ever done that. So that's fun. That's why we went there. Have you been there? Yeah. So it's all going fine. She's asleep in the pram. He's pretending to be the driver. We're coming up to the stop, get them ready, usher him into the carriage so he's ready to step off the train. The train pulls into Mudshoot, and the doors open. Bruno steps onto the platform, and do you remember this story? Sorry, it's a horror story. I don't know why I'm beginning with this, but just as I'm about to push the pram with Una in onto the platform, the doors close and the train just starts pulling away. It was absolutely now I'm telling it, I feel, the physical, it was just awful. And I obviously just completely fell apart and started screaming, my baby, he's on the I'm shaking as I tell it. And obviously nothing happened. People are so kind, they sort of, it'll be okay, but everything goes through your mind. He's going to jump off and try and follow the train because I'm on it, or he's going to be kidnapped, all of the bad things, just sort of. So I pull the emergency cord, which if you've ever done, it takes about sort of 90 seconds for it to actually stop the train. It doesn't actually work. So the train is kind of going, and then of course it ends up stopping in between the Mudshoot and the next station. So then we're just stuck. So then, anything could be happening. I've just made it a million times worse. You wait a few minutes, the driver comes along, because there is actually a driver, or there's someone, what turns out it wasn't Bruno. What's happened? My baby, okay, well, it's probably going to be okay, we'll go back. Anyway, after a long time, which felt like hours, we end up pulling in to the next stop, which of course is only, about sort of 30 meters away, because it's the DLR. It would have taken seconds, And we get onto the platform, and in this kind of state of absolute, I was in despair. I just saw someone walking with him along the pavement. Sorry, I've just realised that I then left Una, but she was fine because she was asleep. With a complete stranger, but she'd been quite nice to me and I just ran towards him, and I think we were both so traumatized by it that we went onto the platform and sat on a bench, and I just held him for about 45 minutes, and I'm telling that story. Why am I telling that story? Telling that story because I just want to think this morning about what happens when our connection sometimes gets ruptured, and what happens also when we repair it. Because obviously it's quite an extreme example, but I think that the connection between us and our kids, or us and each other, or us and our partners, husbands, wives, whatever, our parents, on a lesser scale, it's because they're constantly, we're experiencing these ruptures, and then the repair that comes with that. I'm using the language of the Circle of Security, which is the parenting course, which Kirsty mentioned, Connected Lives, which lots of you have done. It's very good. If you haven't and you think it might be helpful, it's based on attachment theory and the kind of dynamics of attachment theory in our relationships with our children, and how we stay connected, basically, in different situations, and what happens when there is a rupture, how we can then work to repair it. So that's sort of language of rupture and repair, is that's where that's from. But I've also been thinking about it as I was preparing this talk, as being quite central, very central, in fact, to the gospel, to what we believe. And, in Genesis, we get the story of a cataclysmic rupture between us and God. There we were, with him, walking, connected, naked, unashamed, etc., etc. And then along came sin, and that connection got ruptured. And the Old Testament sort of tells the story, I suppose, of the fallout of that rupture, wandering around and trying to get the connection back. And then the New Testament is the story of this amazing repair that took place on the cross. And I've been thinking about how that story of rupture and repair, which, I think is a pattern in our lives, but it's also a pattern in the Bible. There are lots of smaller stories in the Bible that reflect that disconnection, reconnection. And one of them that I'll just dwell on briefly is the story of the prodigal son, which lots of you will know. Jesus tells it in Luke 15. It's about a young man who decides to leave his home, to take all of his inheritance and go, because he wants to have a wild time. So the dad gives him it, and off he goes and has a wild time, and then there's none left because it's all run out, and he ends up eating the food with the pigs, and remember that? So he thinks, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to go back, say sorry, and, can I please be a servant in your house? Obviously, I'm no longer your son, but maybe I can be a servant. And Jesus describes the moment of the reconnection and the repair between the Father and the Son in a verse that I haven't written down from Luke 15 that says, so he arose, I think this might, so he arose and he came to his father, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed him. While he was still a long way off. I love that. We don't have to really walk very far, if at all. I sometimes wonder if we just have to be facing the right way, God sees him while he's a long way off and runs. He runs, and embraces him and kisses him. He does the legwork. In Isaiah, God is described as a shepherd who gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. And I was thinking about what it feels like to be held. So I was holding a baby yesterday. So we went to see some friends. They've just had a baby after a 9-year gap. Crazy. Wonderful also. How old the baby sort of, anyway, but sort of 14 weeks. Anyway, so I'd forgotten about that thing they do when they kind of lock eyes with you and they kind of start, it's quite intense, having this sort of non-verbal conversation with their eyes. Like it's a bit sort of, you feel like they're from some other place. And this baby was doing this with me. It sort of kind of locked me into an eye, in quite intense eye conversation. And it brought it all back about that need for connection, that need for the embrace, and how babies just want to be held, right? Normally at 3:30 in the morning, just sort of, they want to be kind of safe. They want to be connected. When Una was little, I took her to there's a thing called the Baby Lab at Birkbeck. They do lots of research into how babies develop. And one of the things that they've concluded is, not really a surprise, but that when parents hold their babies, like you're doing now, some of you, there's a syncing that happens so that, hearts start to become in sync, or start to meet each other. And that our emotions become regulated so that we're sort of feeling the same thing. And I was thinking about how that happened, with Bruno. It took a long time after the DLR gate. But what that feels like for us when we embrace or are embraced by God, and the idea that, we become in sync. Our hearts start to beat. Our emotions start to regulate in line with him. Moses spent 40 days up on a mountain with God, and then when he came down, his face was shining, really brightly shining. It's transformative, isn't it? That embrace and that connection. That the rupture is pretty horrific, but the good stuff happens in the repair. I think so many times I read all the books and I just wanted to get it right. And I thought the good stuff happens when you get it right. And then the more I sort of have these kids, I realize that the good stuff happens when you get it wrong, There's ruptures all over the place, but then there's this space, there's this opportunity for repair that's quite precious. Psalm 34, just popping around all over the place in the Bible. David writes, "Those who look to him are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame." And 1,000 years later, Paul writes to the Corinthians and uses the same image of a face that's not covered. It's unveiled. He says, "We all who with unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory are being transformed into his image with ever increasing glory, which comes from the Lord who is Spirit." So there's this kind of unveiling of the face. Adam and Eve covered themselves, didn't they? They sewed the fig leaves together and covered themselves because they realized they were naked. They felt shame. But then we come into the presence of God and there's a kind of unveiling and taking that covering off. I just have to tell you then because I was thinking about a way of illustrating this, and it just so happened that this week in a lesson, so I'm a teacher, an English teacher in a secondary school, and I've got this class who are quite bumpy, loads of boys with SEN. I've grown to, I love them, but it was difficult at first while we were getting going. Anyway, I was teaching this poem. It's about a boy who, it's called 2:30. It's about a boy who is at primary school and he gets kept back after class because he's done something very wrong. That's a quote from the poem, something very wrong. And the teacher forgets all about him. And so looking at this poem, and there's a girl in the class who, I'll just call Katie for the sake of this talk, who is autistic and who finds it really difficult to navigate school and exhausting. And she often just isn't in lessons because the whole kind of, overwhelm of school is so exhausting for her. So she was sitting right in the front and she suddenly said, "Miss, this happened to me on Wednesday." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "This happened to me. I was in the sports hall and this teacher said, just stay there for a minute, and then left me and then didn't come back for over an hour." I said, "Oh my goodness, really? I'm so sorry that happened." And she said, I said, "What did you do while you were waiting?" She said, "I wrote a poem about it." "Oh, what, like this?" "Yeah." I said, "Oh, that's so cool. I didn't know you wrote poems. I'd love to read it, if you would be happy for me to." Anyway, so we carry on with the lesson, and then 5 minutes later, she's holding it up on the screen. "Here it is." So I read it, and it was really good. And I said, "Oh, Katie, this is really good. I think you should write more poems." So all the boys are sort of going, "Oh, go on, read it out. Read it out, Katie." And I'm thinking, "Oh, no, I don't know if you should read it. What's going to happen?" I said, "Well, you don't have to read it out. You can go away and think about it, and if you do want to read it out, then we'd love to hear it, but you don't have to read it out." So we carry on with the lesson. 5 minutes later, she just gets up and starts reading it out, right? So it's just brilliant. And everyone goes quiet. Oh, I forgot to say the most important thing for the analogy is that Katie's worn a mask since lockdown. So I've never actually seen her face because she wears it all the time. And she has like lunch and doesn't eat in the dining hall. So I've never seen her without this mask on. And she stood up, took the mask off, and read out her poem. And she got to the end, and there was this moment of kind of, the pin dropping. And all these boys gave her this wonderfully resounding and heartfelt round of applause. And I burst into tears. And she hasn't worn the mask since. Unbelievable. I know. Well done. She hasn't worn it since. And isn't there something about that standing up and saying, "Okay, here I am. I'm taking it off, and I'm gonna trust that it's gonna be okay." Yeah. Their faces are never covered with shame. Their faces are never covered with shame. I guess sort of what we're doing here, we're trying to let ourselves be seen by each other and God. We're trying to face the right way, reorient ourselves a bit and just take it off. I used to have a lot of shame. I think I've talked about this probably ad nauseum in the past, but I used to sort of I can't even remember now sort of what it felt like, but I know it used to be really, really powerful and really sort of paralyzing. And I think sort of goes back quite a long time. And I sort of read lots of, self-help books. And then I remembered that I'm a Christian, so I can just like pray and, oh yeah, that's what he does. I started sort of intentionally sort of coming into God's presence and trying to take off the mask and let myself be fully seen, bit by bit, slowly. I don't know if that's why I don't feel it anymore, but I don't. And also, I sort of wonder if when we do that, you know, this idea of being transformed and their faces are radiant as well, that you become more like God. You find yourself thinking in new ways and behaving differently when you spend time in that embrace. I think I'm coming into land here. Is that okay? I'm just going to read a bit of Jeremiah, which describes, I think, what it's like to live your life in this way, connected, you know, in the repair. Blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence is in him. They will be like a tree planted by water that sends out its roots by the stream. It does not fear when the heat comes. Its leaves are always green. It has no worries in a year of drought and never fails to bear fruit. Amen. And obviously, if you sort of thought, if any of that was in any way interesting or made you think anything, then that thing that Kirsteen was talking about, what's it called? It's got a cool name. The Curiosity Collective on Tuesday would be a great place to talk about some of this stuff. So do go to that. I'm going to hand back to the band. Thank you.